Greetings, folks. It's time for another tall tale from the book of Golden Soil. Oh, it's so good to have competitive sport back in our lives and on our TV screens. I'm sure you'd agree. But one sport in particular that may have just snuck under your guard a little bit was one that was officially announced on the radio as having returned post-pandemic a couple of weeks ago. And it certainly delighted me to hear that the sport of pigeon racing was back. And I'm sure Bill Lawry was equally as stoked. It reminded me of an ode I wrote many years ago, 1993 in fact. I wrote this poem for a trivia night. Now the story goes that my father had many books on his shelf. He still does. But one of my favourite books to pull down and have a read through was the McCall book of sporting records. So there I was, turning the pages, the different sports and categories, and one day I stumbled across a very interesting chapter, and that pertained to the sport of pigeon racing. So I was scrolling through, the different records and milestones and categories when I came across this one, and I was fascinated. Worst time by an Australian pigeon, and I quote, word for word, by Percy, a pigeon owned by Claude Dunn of Stawell, Victoria, who returned to his home loft in 1971 from a race he had started in 1960. Percy's 11 years for a race of 550 air miles was the longest absence or race time pigeon racing officials have uncovered. Oh, it easily beat the previous worst time of 5 years by Darky. Now, both Percy and Darky are believed to have been forced down by hawks and to have lived in someone else's loft during their long absences from home. Now, this is important. Both were easily identified by leg bands. That is from the McCall Book of Sporting Records, 1973. Well, I just couldn't pass that by for a poem. And so, this, ladies and gentlemen, is the true story of Percy, the prodigal pigeon. I love a piece of trivia, a challenge for the brain, a question that will take me on a trip down memory lane. I love a set of circumstances oddly unrealistic, a factual illusion, a slightly strange statistic. But my poem would not make sense without a truly classic sample, so lendeth me your ears, and I will speaketh my example. The year is 1960. Melbourne is the place. Percy is the nickname of a pigeon in a race. A very special pigeon, he was second best to none. The feathered pride and joy of his owner, Claude Dunn. Yet, as he waved goodbye to the pigeon he had groomed, Claude had no perception of the tragedy which loomed, and Percy too was unaware of what he was creating. His little wings were flapping, and the record books were waiting. A tragedy, I mentioned. Well, you must be filled with wonder. Maybe he was skiddled by a heavy clap of thunder, or was poor Percy ambushed by a ruthless flock of maggies? Or did he have a run-in with some hostile willy waggies? Well, the answer to this question will forever be a mystery, but this is what we know. This is what made history. A sunny Melbourne morning dawned in 1971. Sitting on his back veranda, there was Claude Dunn. His hair was so much greyer, for his final hope had ceased. Yes, Percy was a missing bird, presumed to be deceased. So Claude cried his daily tear and gave a weary cough. 11 years had passed. He had written Percy off. Then, as from the heavens high, a miracle occurred. There upon the clothesline sat a too familiar bird. Surely it could not be him. Lord have bloody mercy. Claude checked the leg band. Hallelujah. It was Percy. Oh, you should have seen the happy smile that beamed on Claude's face. Little Percy, home at last. I suppose he'd won his race. An owner-bird reunion that was charged with high emotion. What then is the trivia? I hear the people motion. Well, Percy had a heap of heart. He must have been a goer. But in pigeon racing history, there have not been any slower. Thank you. Have a great weekend.